conversations, talking about implicit biases and recognizing that there's an extreme pushback against racism or sexism and all these different things, and that even though these things, these ideas that they're pushing might not be tested and proven, the idea of putting it out there in the mainstream, that there's a shift in consciousness in terms of like how people will or won't accept racism or sexism or homophobia or whatever else is being discussed, that maybe it's far left, but maybe it's moving the needle towards where it needs to be.
I think that happens. I mean, I certainly believe that there's space and necessity for a constant dialogue between the left and the right. This is also something that I've been developing more particularly during these lectures. So I'm going to lay out a couple of propositions. So imagine that you have to move forward in the world. You have to do things. Mm-hmm. And the reason you have to do things is because, well, if you just sit there and don't do anything, then you suffer and die. So that isn't an option. You have to move forward. You have to move forward towards valued things. So you have to have a value hierarchy. It has to be a hierarchy because one thing has to be more important than another, or you can't do anything, right? You're too split with your choices. So you have to do things. You have to value some things more than others. Then you have to act out what you value in the social environment, because you're a social creature and you're not going to do things alone. Then as soon as you start to act out things of value in the social environment, you inevitably produce a hierarchy. And the reason you do that is because no matter what you're acting out, some people are way better at it than others. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's basketball or hockey or plumbing or law. It doesn't matter. As soon as there's something valuable and you're doing it collectively, there's a hierarchy. Okay, so then what happens? Well, the hierarchy can get corrupt and rigid, and then it stops rewarding competence and it starts rewarding criminality and power. And so there's always the danger the hierarchy will become corrupt. The right-wingers say, we really need the hierarchies and we should abide by them. That's sort of the motif of patriotism and positive group identity. And the left-wingers say, yeah, but wait a second. There's a problem here. A, your hierarchy can get corrupt and might. And B, because some people are way better at it than others, you're going to produce a bunch of dispossessed people at the bottom. And that's not only not good for the dispossessed people, it actually threatens the whole hierarchy. So you have to be careful. You have to attend to the widows and the children, let's say, the widows and the orphans. Okay, and so now you can think about that as an eternal problem. You can't do without hierarchies, but, and that's the right-wing claim in some sense, you can't do without hierarchies and they're valuable, but they're also prone to corruption and they dispossess people. Okay, so now that's an eternal problem. The question is, what do you do about it? And the answer to that is, there's no final answer to the problem. So what you have to do is you have to have a left wing and you have to have a right wing, and they have to talk all the time about whether the hierarchy is healthy and whether or not it's dispossessing too many people. And then the problem with that is that discussion can go too far, because the right wingers can say hierarchy über alles, right? That the state is correct and everything's right, and so that's the right wing totalitarian types. And the left can say we'll flatten everything so there's no inequality. And so both the left and the right can go too far. Now, the problem is we know how to define, I think one of the problems is we know how to define when the right goes too far. I think we learned that after World War II. I think if you're making claims of ethnic or racial superiority, you get to be put in a box and put off the shelf, right? You're not in the dialogue anymore. It's obvious that the left can go too far, even though they're necessary participants in the discussion, but we don't know how to define when they've gone too far.
And we don't have an obvious example.
No, and you might think, well, that's the moderate leftists' problem. It's their moral responsibility to dissociate themselves from the radicals, just as it's the moral responsibility of reasonable conservatives to dissociate themselves from the John Birch and Ku Klux Klan types.
That's a very important point.
But it isn't just the moderate left's problem, because even the people on the right don't know what to point to when they say, no, you've gone too far as a leftist. Now, I've tried to. It's complicated because I think it might be more than one policy. I think the really deadly leftist presumption is equality of outcome. I think as soon as you start talking about equality of outcome, you should be put in a box and put off the shelf. But it isn't obvious why. Like, that doesn't sound like, white people overall. It doesn't have the same guttural punch that the excess of the right has. It's, right. Well, you're for equality of outcome. Why is that bad? Well, it's bad because when you play it out in society, and there's endless evidence for this, it's an instantaneously murderous doctrine. And I think it's because it shifts so quickly into a victim-victimizer narrative.